Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala of Nigeria as the next Director General of the WTO. It is so agreed.
She is the first woman, the first African, and today she sits at the helm of an institution that shapes the rules of over $30 trillion in global trade. But her journey did not begin in Geneva. It began in Ogwashi-Uku, a quiet Nigerian town far removed from the glittering halls of global power. There, a young girl learned the weight of discipline, of education, of resilience. There she began the climb that would one day carry her from village classrooms to Harvard, to the World Bank, to the battlefields of Nigeria's debt crisis, and finally, to the seat of global trade itself. This is not just the story of an economist. It is the story of a woman who turned intellect into influence and courage into a crown. This is the story of Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala. In 1954, Ogwashi-Uku, Delta State, in this small Nigerian village, a young girl named Ngozi was born into a family of scholars and public servants. But the childhood would not be easy. When the Nigerian Civil War broke out, her world collapsed. Her family lost everything. She lived as a refugee, fetching water, pounding cassava, watching hunger gnaw at children of her age. And yet, through the dust of war, she carried a dream that education could be our escape. A scholarship took her from a village classroom to Harvard University, from fetching water in refugee camps to walking the libraries of the Ivy League. At Harvard, she excelled, and at MIT, she went further, earning a PhD in economics, mastering the numbers that would one day save nations. Her story was no longer just about survival. It was about a girl from Ogwashi-Uku who dared to believe her mind could shape the world. Washington, D.C. The 1980s debt crisis was shaking the world, from Mexico to Ghana, from Brazil to Zaire, and on the corridors of the World Bank, a Nigerian woman was quietly mastering the levers of global finance. Her name, Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala. For 25 years, she worked her way up through the institution's ranks until she became vice president, a portfolio, multi-billion-dollar development project that spanned continents. She oversaw loans to rebuild crumbling economies. She negotiated debt relief packages that determined whether countries sank or survived. She learned the choreography of power, debt restructuring, aid flows, structural reforms. At the World Bank, Ngozi built a reputation not just for brilliance, but for integrity, calm under raging fire, unmoved by pressure. A Nigerian woman who could move billions with the stroke of a pen and win respect in rooms dominated by men. But even as she shaped policies across Asia and Latin America, her thoughts kept circling home. Nigeria, a land blessed with oil and cursed with corruption. Her greatest challenge would not be in Washington, it would be in Abuja. The banker who managed the world was about to go home and try to fix a country. 2003, President Olusegun Obasanjo made a call that would change Nigeria's financial destiny. He asked a daughter of the soil to come home. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, the woman who had managed billions at the World Bank, was summoned to rescue a nation drowning in debt. Nigeria owed $30 billion to foreign creditors. Interest piled higher each day. Corruption bled the treasury dry. The people had lost faith. As finance minister, Ngozi went to war. Her weapons: transparency, accountability, reform. For the first time in history, she ordered that Nigeria's oil revenues be published for all to see. She slashed waste in ministries. She closed loopholes that fed cronies and kingmakers. But every reform had enemies. Politicians who thrived on secrecy, elites who grew fat from corruption, and yet Ngozi refused to back down. Then came a master stroke. In smoke-filled boardrooms in Paris, she faced down the world's most powerful creditors, the Paris Club. They said Nigeria was too corrupt to trust, too unstable to forgive. But Ngozi brought data, discipline, and vision of a Nigeria free from debt. Breaking news! Nigeria secured an $18 billion debt relief deal, the largest in Africa's history. For the first time in a generation, Nigeria could breathe. Billions were wiped away. A new chapter opened. This was not just finance, it was freedom. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala had done the impossible. She had wrestled with the world's creditors and won. But in Nigeria, every victory is fragile, and the toughest battles were still ahead. Reform in Nigeria was never smooth. Every policy was a battle. Every victory drew blood. When Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala pushed to remove fuel subsidies, a system long abused by cartels and cronies, the streets erupted. To the masses, it meant higher petrol prices. To the elites, it meant their gravy train was over. Both sides turned on her. But she stood her ground. For her, subsidies were a black hole draining billions from the nation's future. The backlash wasn't only political, it became personal. Threats came daily. A name was dragged in headlines. And then, the unthinkable. In 2012, gunmen kidnapped her 83-year-old mother. Their demand was that Ngozi must resign, that she abandons her reforms. For days, the nation held its breath. But Ngozi would not yield. She refused to be broken. Her mother was eventually freed, but the message was clear. Reform in Nigeria was not just an economic fight. It was a fight for survival. Through it all, she never wavered. Because for Ngozi, reform was never about comfort. It was about responsibility. It was about legacy. After weathering Nigeria's storms, Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala stepped once more onto the global stage. And this time, the world listened. She was nominated for the presidency of the World Bank, the first African woman ever considered for the role. Though she didn't win, the moment itself shifted perceptions. Africa was no longer just a recipient of aid. It was producing leaders capable of directing the flow of trillions. Her portfolio grew vast. On the board of Gavi, she helped secure vaccines for millions of children. At Standard Chartered, she shaped investment strategies spanning continents. Even Silicon Valley called. Twitter invited her to its board, tapping her insight into global markets and governance. What set her apart was not only intellect, but trust. Here was an African woman who could sit across from presidents, bankers, and billionaires and command their respect. For years, the global system had doubted voices like ours, but Ngozi had proven something radical. That integrity, discipline, and courage could travel from a village in Delta State to the boardrooms where the world's money moves. She was no longer just Nigeria's reformer. She was a global voice, one who carried Africa into conversations where it had too often been absent. February 2021, a moment the world had never seen before. For the first time, the World Trade Organization, the body that governs the arteries of global commerce, would be led by a woman, and not just any woman, an African woman, Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala. Her desk in Geneva now held the weight of nations, 95% of global trade, over $30 trillion in goods and services flowing through a system she was called to repair. The challenges were immense. The world was still in the grip of COVID-19. Vaccines had become the most valuable commodity on earth, ordered by rich nations, out of reach for poorer ones. Ngozi became the negotiator-in-chief, a bridge between North and South, between power and need, between profit and survival. Beyond the pandemic, she steered talks on digital commerce, fisheries, intellectual property. She fought to make the WTO more transparent, more responsive, more human. This was not just another technocrat in power. It was a woman from Ogwashi Uku, who had carried water in wartime, now shaping the destiny of the global economy. At the helm of the WTO, Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala became more than a symbol. She became proof that leadership born in Africa could guide the world. From the dusty roads of Ogwashi Uku to the gleaming corridors of Geneva, Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala's journey is not measured only in titles, but in the weight of numbers she has carried. $18 billion lifted from Nigeria's debt, hundreds of billions steered through World Bank projects across continents, 30 trillion, the trade of nations overseen from our chair at the WTO. But numbers alone cannot define our. A true legacy is the courage to insist on transparency where secrecy thrived, the strength to fight corruption even when it put a family in danger, the vision to prove that leadership from Africa can shape the world's future. She is the daughter of teachers who became a teacher to nations. The girl who once carried buckets of water now carries the trust of billions. A legacy is not just reform, it is possibility for every African child who dares to dream beyond the borders of their village. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala is not just an economist, she is Africa's mother of reform, a guardian of fairness in global trade, and one of the most powerful women the world has ever known.